In September of 2010, a colleague at work told me he saw a documentary on TV that told about a strange construction with a booby-trapped hole in the ground. I was of course hooked immediately and spent the next few months reading everything I could get hold of on the subject. I read about different theories regarding who built Oak Island Money Pit and was intrigued by the complexity of the construction. I found the Spanish theory appealing and the Shakespeare theory crazy. I was also pretty convinced the 40 feet below message was fake. But I could not help finding the work of Dr. Owen from the beginning of the 20th century intriguing. He was the first with the theory that the Shakespeare manuscripts were buried on Oak Island. After him came Pen Leary, who during the 60s and 70s argued that the Shakespeare manuscript was buried on Oak Island. Leary even visited the island at least one time. One day in March 2011, I was bored at work. I saw on internet a scan of a transcription on a website talking about the Bacon-Shakespeare connection, spelling Mr. Francis Bacon of tribute or giving what is due. I thought dew is water and somehow connected this vaguely to Oak Island flood traps. I also found it strange that two F's had been used in sequence. At the time I didn't know that 16th century English often wrote a capital F with two lowercase ff's in succession. I also noticed that Francis had a U after the A, which I thought strange. I connected the two F's to the legend of the 40 feet below message, as one of the F's were crossed out in that sequence. With a casual idea, I thought I'd print these two sentences and check on the bus home if they are anagrams. In anagram check, you simply cross letters. I walked off that bus with a white face. I couldn't believe the result I got. Of course the sentences were not anagrams, but I got a leftover sequence of letters that I could interpret as deep folly by moving a leftover F. Was this a possible attribute of the money pit? Was this a coincidence? At first I thought it was. I thought I had been too creative in my decipherment. But when I got home I began investigating the document this sentence was written in. It was called the Northumberland Manuscript. The sentence I experimented with on the bus was written on the title page, but on the first page inside the manuscript folio, in the exact same position on top of the page, a very similar sentence was written. Mr. Bacon of tribute or giving that which is due. I did the same experiment with this sentence, crossing letters, checking for anagram with the Oak Island 40 feet below message, when I discovered that I got the exact same result except for an additional W. I thought this result was staggering, as the sentence on the first page was very different in construction. Was this a result of pure coincidence? Did I push it by moving the crossed F? Or was this an intended cipher structure? I decided to investigate this further. The incident was the beginning of a cryptographic journey that would span the next 4 years of my life and almost wreck my life and economy. But to explain it all properly and in an understandable manner, I need to start with some historic information. In 1604 or 1605, the first Earl of Northampton, Henry Howard, built a large mansion at Charing Cross, London. The house was erected right next to York House, the childhood home of Francis Bacon. During the mid-1580s, Howard spent some time in the country house of Nicholas Bacon at Redgrave. He seemed to have been well acquainted with the Bacons, and Francis Bacon called Henry the learnedest counsellor in the kingdom. Henry was 21 years older than Bacon and died in the Charing Cross mansion in 1614. Howard's nephew Thomas Howard, Earl of Suffolk, succeeded his uncle in the ownership of the house in 1614, which subsequently became known as Suffolk House. In the 1640s, the house was sold to the Earl of Northumberland. Thomas Howard was the 21st Earl of Arundel, a title he inherited from his father Philip. Later he was also created first Earl of Norfolk. Thomas was born in 1585 and was thus 24 years younger than Bacon. In 1618, while Thomas Howard lived at the mansion, Francis Bacon moved into his childhood home York House right next door. Bacon stayed there until 1622. In 1621 he had a huge banquet at York House to celebrate his 60th birthday, with poet Ben Jonson present. Thomas Howard was known as the Collector's Earl. He had a huge collection of paintings, manuscripts and sculptures. He was also a personal friend to Bacon. In the year 1867, a John Bruce was going through material in the library cellar of the Suffolk Mansion, then called the Northumberland House. In a previously unopened black wooden box, Bruce found a lot of handwritten letters, lists and manuscripts. They were all consumed to various degrees by fire. In this pile of paper, Bruce found a manuscript with the names Francis Bacon and William Shakespeare together on the cover. The cover also contained the names of poets Henry Neville and Thomas Nash. Bruce gave the manuscript to 19th century Bacon researcher James Spedding in 1870. Since then, the manuscript had been thoroughly analyzed, transcribed and photographed by James Spedding in 1870 and Frank G. Burgoyne in 1904. The manuscript itself was dated 1595 to 1598. Spedding thought the manuscript ended up in the box during an 18th century fire in the house, and that the manuscript once belonged to Francis Bacon. Bacon lived right next door to Suffolk House from 1618 to 1622, and was well acquainted with the Howards. The Northumberland manuscript is the only contemporary document that mentions Francis Bacon and William Shakespeare together. The manuscript has deteriorated badly and resides at the Percy family estate at Alnwick Castle. I made an exact full-size digital reconstruction of the cover sheet front and back using high-res prints from the British Library. The photographs for the prints was taken in 1870 by James Spedding's photographer. I have clarified the text by overlaying transcripts done by Spedding and Burgoyne. They were both expert in 17th century handwriting. The Northumberland manuscript, as it was found 1867, consisted of 24 folded folio sheets with handwritten text. The sheets were fastened together with a pin in the back. One leaf was ripped out, number 10. One leaf seemed glued or pasted in. 45 leaves total. 2 leaves blank with no content. The right and bottom edges were burned. The cover sheet and the backside contain chaotic scribble made by John Davis of Hereford, and possibly also one or two other scriveners, maybe Bacon. John Davis was a master scrivener, poet, and employed by Bacon. The cover consists of names scattered around the page, chaotic scribbling, and also titles of works by Bacon and plays by Shakespeare and Thomas Nash. 4 works by Bacon present inside the folio is not mentioned on the cover. All works inside the folio was authored by Francis Bacon, except one by Philip Sidney. 8 works mentioned on the cover are missing, including all of the plays. The text inside the manuscripts is not by the hand of Bacon, but by at least 2 other scriveners. In the middle of the cover sheet front page, we find the text Earl of Arundel's letter to the Queen, and then again further down, Earl of Arundel's letter to the Queen's Might. This connects the Northumberland manuscript with the Earl of Arundel, and probably refers to Thomas Howard's father, Philip Howard. Philip Howard was arrested in 1585 for high treason and put into the Tower. Other scribble on the front cover form the following very interesting phrases. In the center, by Mr. Francis William, Inheerling Shakespeare. Inheerling is an obsolete English word that means in secret or hidden. It is written upside down just in front of the word Shakespeare and after Francis William. We find another interesting phrase in Latin in the upper left corner of the cover page. In translation, it cuts at the long-standing want of honor among men and at their hypocrisy. Their speech is as milk and honey, but gallous in their hearts, and their deeds are meant to deceive. The long Latin word honorificabilitudine can be interpreted as something or someone in the state of being able to receive honor. Another version of this word can be found in Shakespeare's Love's Labour's Lost, and yet another can also be found in Francis Bacon's personal notebook, Promus. In the upper left corner of the cover page, we have text written upside down, diverse places indirectly for profit. On the right side, we find incerto authore, the uncertainty of authorship. In the lower left corner of the front page, we find revealing date through every cranny peeps and see shack. This phrase is from The Rape of Lucrece, and the text immediately after this sentence is and seems to point her out. We will return to this later. In the upper right corner of the front page, there is a phrase, Mr. Francis Bacon of tribute or giving what is due. The lines under the area of this phrase and the three symbols, together with larger size of the text, seem to indicate that this text is a title of some kind, maybe the title of the whole manuscript. The symbols underneath the sentence is most interesting. They depict from left to right the helmet of Pallas Athene and the helmet of Pluto, both representing the concept of invisibility. The last symbol represents the Rosicrucian rose. Above the larger symbols is a small symbol that looks like a small circle with a horizontal line. This symbol was often used by Bacon above his own signature. It represents the mirror of Pallas Athene, the mirror of wisdom, receiving and transmitting knowledge by reflection. Now, if we turn to the first page inside the folio, we find in almost the exact same position of the page the sentence, Mr. Fr. Bacon of tribute or giving that which is due. The sentence seems to give the same message as the sentence on the front page, but with several letters and the last part different. It forms a title to the Four Praises. The Four Praises was authored by Bacon. A handwritten copy of two of them reside in the British Library without a title, and another handwritten copy with all four praises intact resides at the Komodo Memorial Library in Tokyo. The Tokyo copy is titled Tribute or Giving That Which Is Due. So the Northumberland manuscript contains one out of two extant full copies that has a title. It seems that Giving That Which Is Due version is the original title, and the Giving What Is Due is a possible deliberate distortion of the meaning of the sentence. If we compare the two sentences, we find that the one on the front page ends with giving what is due, and the one on the next page ends with giving that which is due. This seems very strange. Why would the author make two completely different spellings of the same sentence on the cover and on the first page? Even if we take into account that spelling was not standardized in late 16th century English, we find the following differences in the meaning of these sentences. Or giving what is due seemed to point to the attribute of something called due, and that this would be given if Master Francis Bacon cannot be tributed. The logical operator or in the sentence make it clear that the two expressions to be tributed or giving what is due is separated and cannot both be the actual case at the same time. So the sentence tells us that we will either find that Francis Bacon can be tributed or that Francis Bacon will give what is due. Or giving that which is due, on the other hand, seem to point to something that is predestined to happen, and that this would be given if Bacon cannot be tributed. So we find distinct differences in the meanings of these two sentences, even if they are almost the same except for the spelling. If we look at the first sentence on the cover and try to understand it, we find that the attribute of dew is water. Dew is water in modern spelling, yes, but even in 16th century English, when people had to understand written words phonetically, it could be understood as morning moisture, dew. So the ending giving what is due can be understood as giving water. On its own, the front page sentence might seem to point to something that is predestined to happen, but when the author directly on the next page writes the same sentence very differently, we can suspect that the full sentence on the front page was intended to be interpreted as Master Francis Bacon of tribute or giving water. Before we continue, we need to learn a cryptographic technique called anagram subtraction cipher. Anagram subtraction is a method of creating a cipher where we use two different sentences to hide a message. By subtracting all letters that appear in both sentences from both sentences,
the leftover sequence of letters in one of the sentences form the message. The method is difficult to encipher but easy to decipher if you know which two sentences to use in the subtraction. Without this knowledge, the cipher is of course unbreakable unless you make random cryptographic experiments. This cipher is suitable for short sentences, but could be used for longer messages if one writes two identical texts and slightly misspell or change one. This will form a leftover sequence in relation to the other.
This is a visual representation of how the anagram subtraction cipher works in the sentence from the front sheet of the Northumberland manuscript, minus the Kempton symbol message. As the second F is crossed out in the Kempton message, we could of course interpret this as an instruction to remove it. But as this F is neither used in the polyalphabetic decipherment of the symbols or in the substituted decipherment, it would have been completely meaningless to include it in the Kempton sequence if it had no purpose. So let's just leave it where it is. In the anagram subtraction you see here, it is not removed but left in the beginning of the leftover sequence. The leftover sequence of letters in the Northumberland manuscript sentence is gibberish, but the leftover sequence in the Kempton message forms yellow poid, in addition to the crossed out F in the beginning. This could of course be a complete coincidence, even though we seem to have some repetitions of letters, and maybe words. But a surprising thing is that when we do the exact same experiment with the sentence from the first page in the Northumberland manuscript, we get almost the exact same result in the leftover sequence of the Kempton message. The only difference is a W between the L's. The two Northumberland manuscript sentences are very similar, but there are considerable differences in the sequence of letters forming them. The differences could be explained by subtracting one from the other. We see that the cover sheet sentence has a leftover sequence VNAISW, and the first page sentence leftover sequence is THU. Yet, when either of these two sentences are subtracted from the Kempton sequence, we get the same leftovers except for a W. If this is coincidence, then it's very unusual.
Now let's look at the small glyph under the true message on the cover. This symbol represents the mirror of Pallas Athene, which in Greek mythology was used to capture Medusa. It was often used by Bacon above his own signature. It's a symbol for receiving and transmitting knowledge by reflection. So what if we interpret this symbol as an instruction to mirror our result? If we mirror the sequence of leftover letters, we get something that can be read phonetically in both results, sounding the same. Diup Oli, Diup Ovali. We have to remember that spelling was not standardized in 16th century English, so if this is an intended message, it would be acceptable to a 16th century person who had to read all text phonetically. We recognize the English word deep in the beginning, but what is Oli? And what about the crossed out F? In the reflection, this letter appears last in the sequence. What if we interpret the crossed out F as instructions telling that this F is in the wrong place? We could interpret it as being a null, something to remove, but on a second thought we find that if this were the case, the crossed F would be completely meaningless in the sequence. So this is not probable. Let us instead try to put F in the right place. If we think phonetically and try to put the F in between the letters in every place possible, we find that there is only one place we can put it to get something readable. If we place the F between the P and the O, we get two readable English words. If we place it in any other place, we get gibberish.
So what is a deep folly? Follies were popular during the 16th century on large estates. The wealthy built buildings for decorative purposes. They had no use other than decoration. Deep folly could therefore mean a fake building built downwards. It could also mean a deep idiocy, of course. A deep fake building could be an adequate description of the money pit if we assume the money pit contained no treasure. If this is the case, then the Kempton sentence 40 feet below £2 million are buried is a lie. So if the anagram subtraction cipher that we can produce by subtracting the two sentences on the Northumberland manuscript from the Kempton message is indeed a real intended cipher, then this would mean that someone wanted to create a cipher that transforms the Kempton message to the message Deep Folly. This would of course also mean that the message Deep Folly is a correction of the 40 feet below 2 million pounds are buried message, indicating that the Kempton message is a false statement, a lie. So if we can somehow prove that this cipher was indeed intended by a cipher maker, then we have made an astounding discovery. But of course we cannot prove this. But what we can do is approach the notion of reasonable doubt. It would be very improbable that we would get the same sequence of leftover letters except for a W when subtracting two different sentences from the same third sentence. Even if the two sentences on Northumberland manuscript are similar, the spelling and the number of each characters are quite different. The extra W doesn't change the phonetical understanding of the sequence. We are moving the crossed F to the only position that results in something understandable, and this move is of course something we create ourselves, and it might be a bit pushy to think this is intended. But in any case, the Deep Ollie and Deep Overly form the same phonetical expression from two different spelled sentences. If the difference between the two sentences were carefully designed, then this could explain the same outcome when conducting an anagram subtraction with the Kempton message. So what does this mean? If this cipher was intended, then there could be more codes and/or ciphers in the Northumberland manuscript. I spent a few weeks investigating this possibility before I noticed strange positionings of words and characters among the title sheet scribble. The cover sheet of the manuscript looks like chaotic scribble, but on a closer look we find it suspicious. For example, why would anyone, for the purpose of random scribbling, write the name Francis upside down over the same name Francis? And why would anyone write in healing, meaning secret, just above the name Shakespeare? It would be understandable if the scribbler wanted to communicate a message, but as chaotic scribbling it is not believable. The cover sheets seem to list a number of titles authored by Francis Bacon, Thomas Nash, William Shakespeare and others. It also makes several references that question the authorship of several texts. Other interesting lines of text make references to honor and that some people seem ready to receive it. The Latin text on the left side, which translated to say, "It cuts at the long-standing want of honor among men and their hypocrisy. Their speech is as milk and honey, but gallous in their heart, and their deeds are meant to deceive." This expression indicates that the deeds of some men are meant to deceive, and that these men also want honor for something. Also, the two symbols in the upper corner of the manuscript represents the helmet of Pallas Athene and Pluto, which seem to give hints. They symbolize invisibility. So this cover sheet could possibly be some form of cryptogram, hiding information. Let's investigate this. To do a correct cryptographic analysis, we need to find the placement of the two pages that form the original cover sheet in relation to each other. If there are cryptograms hidden on the sheet, it is possible that the backside scribble was used to hide the cryptograms. The image you see here is an exact digital reconstruction I have made of both pages. I've used all available prints. The original sheet is much deteriorated by now, so I used photographic facsimiles from the 1870s made by James Spedding's photographer. We notice that the two pages, back and front cover, have a right angle here, so we can be sure about the vertical relation between the two and the horizontal tilt. But we cannot be sure about the original distance horizontally between the two pages when they form one sheet. But we can figure out the smallest and get a good guess of the furthest possible distance between the pages. They cannot have been closer together than touching, and they cannot have been further away than a normal tearing of folded paper will make possible. Pages that get separated in a fold due to age or exhaustion would not lose much material in the center. So a good guess would be something like this.
I have set a 2mm gap seen here for this investigation, as the cryptogram have a simpler solution if the text on the page had this distance between each other originally. But in the second lecture I will investigate the solution to the cryptogram in such scenario where the two pages touch and no distance is set between them. It will be a somewhat more subtle but fully functional and fully understandable solution. The next step would be to clarify all scribbled text, so that we can see easier what is written. I've used clarifications from both James Spedding, Frank G. Burgoyne and Walter Saunders. I rechecked every letter myself and I found no discrepancies. There are some scribbles that are very hard to read, but they are just a few words here and there. I have left these untranscribed. In the transcriptions I have very carefully placed letters over scribbles, so that each letter take up the exact same space as the scribble underneath. No more, no less.
While looking closely at the scribble, I found the word your quite strangely written 2 times, positioned in the lower part of the manuscript. These 2 your are tilted at an angle not present in words in other places around them. Instead of following the horizontal lines of text, these words are tilted at a 45-degree angle. Also, when I dragged a line between the first letter I in both of these words, I found that this line also hit directly on or in ornamentation of 4 other yours and 1 I in the word day. This is 7 I's in alignment in the word your. The last I it hit is on the back side of the sheet, where this your is not clearly spelled out as we can only see the first letter I. What the word it is meant to represent is spelled out on the row above, which is a repetition of the same sentence. So it is the same word your. This I is also ornamented in a distinct way. Even if we are unsure of the original distance between the front and back pages when they were united as one sheet, the ornamentation of the backside I enabled the line to hit this I in both the smallest and furthest possible distance of the pages. After this revelation, I marked all words your on the sheet and found 25 of them. While looking at the scribble searching for alignments, I almost immediately saw a structure. Scribbles seem to follow an imaginary line drawn between 2 yours and 3 I's in the lower section of the sheet. One could of course argue that this line is simply the direction of the written characters, but is it? The angle of the scribble is tilted to a higher degree than the surrounding scribble, and seems to be part of 2 distinct different entries. Also, if we look closely, we see that in the first part of the scribble following this imaginary line, with the upper side of the scribble on the line, but in the next part here it is the lower part of the scribble that seems to follow the line. The first your also seems to follow the line, and the second your has a small circle ornamentation, where the line pierces the circle in the center. Also the word master, MR, in front of Francis, have an extra circle drawn above it that also encircles this imaginary line. It is my strong belief that this precision could not have been done without using either a ruler of sort or by following a projected line from a camera obscura or something similar. A camera obscura would project the shadow of a line on the paper for John Davis of Hereford to follow. A method of hiding a geometric form on this sheet could be to create a shape with thin hair or metal strings, and then project this shape onto the sheet with a camera obscura. It would then have been easy for John Davis to scribble precisely and hide the shape. Master scriveners like John Davis was very skilled, but it is simply not possible in my view to write with such straight precision with first upper section and then directly after the lower section in a straight line without using a guide to follow. Could this structure be a hint? Is it created on purpose to show that the letter I, not only the letter I in the word your, gives the solution to a cryptogram? The line hits 2 I's in your and 3 I's by themselves or in different words. My interest now shifted from the word your to the letter I by itself. While checking the I letter on the sheet, I also noticed that in the Kempton symbols, the 6th symbol that represents an I in the substituted decipherment, the only I in the message, is an arrow tilted down and left. If the Kempton symbols indeed represent the true symbols found on a stone in the pit, and these symbols are indeed connected to Northumberland manuscript somehow, then this arrow could be an instruction. Is it an instruction to draw arrows or lines between the letter I on the cover sheet? In this stage of my investigation, I also noticed that inside the manuscript pages among the text, there were small elevated letters above some characters. This is consistent with 16th century flamboyant handwriting styles and shortening of words. But at a closer look I found that there are only elevated letters above or beside I's, W's and O's. No other letters. I cross-checked with Spedding, who was a 19th century professional historic transcriber, transcript of the manuscript content, and found the same structure there. I could only find elevated letters over I's, W's and O's. The elevated letters themselves seem to follow no pattern, as they are different in many places, but the fact that these elevations only occur after I's, W's and O's are interesting. Is someone trying to point out the significance of these three types of letters? Maybe. If it is a hint, then it is vague. I began to investigate the 58 I's on the cover sheet. I spent many hours trying to find other alignments between the letter I, and also used specially created software to find alignments. The result you see in this image are all alignments between I's on the cover sheet between 5 or more I's, plus some of the lines between 4 I's. Alignments between 3 and 4 I's have a large chance of being created by coincidence, and there are many of them. I will explain this soon. I have taken into account the ornamentation of the I characters, as this type of ornamentation, a small circle, was used in one of the I's in the line I previously showed. This circle is distinct and part of the letter. I found as expected many alignments of 4 I's, but only 6 alignments between 5 I's, 2 of 6 I's, and 2 between 7 I's. These alignments occur among 58 I's inside the small area of the manuscript sheet. But then I took a step back. Did I not push it, trying to find patterns among chaos? Isn't it easy to draw lines between characters on any page and have the line hit other letters of the same sort on its way? I tried to find methods to investigate statistics regarding this, but found it was very complicated and concluded I needed help from a mathematician. In 2013, I met a mathematician at Lunds University, Professor Thomas Persson. He helped me develop statistical models to be used with historic steganography of this sort, among other things. But first back to late 2011. I figured out a method with which I possibly could get an idea of the chance for alignments being the product of coincidence, in contrast to being the product of intentional positioning of the scrivener. I used a script to exchange all text on Northumberland manuscript transcription into text from a random poem by Christopher Marlowe. Marlowe was the poetic competitor of Shakespeare. I tried to recreate repetitive sentences on the original with Marlowe lines by slightly changing the auto-created overlay. This project thus simulated a scrivener with absolute no intention of hiding a cryptogram between letters of the same sort, but using the same amount of letters total and the approximate same position of the sheet as the original. What was interesting to see was if alignments did occur. As I was investigating the letter I, which occurred 58 times on the original, I had to isolate the letter in the Marlowe experiment that appeared the same amount of times. The letter D occurred nearly 58 times, and I removed a few to get to exact 58. Now I had a situation where written English text, the same language as in the original manuscript, were written over the same surface and with the same size and positions, and I was 100% sure there were no hidden cryptogram. Thus possible alignments between letters was 100% the product of coincidence. Checking for alignments, I found that alignments between 3 Ds were very common, and also found a few alignments between 4 letters, but I found none between 5 or more. Also, in the alignments between 4 when using a 1 mm wide line going from the central section of the first D to the central section of the last, the other Ds did not seem to be positioned with a central section exactly on the line, but were wiggling slightly around it. I repeated the experiment, but with the letter K in the Mahler version. If we were to look at the first Yor line on the original manuscript, we find that this alignment of 7 eyes go through 6 eyes that belongs to the word Yor. One of the Yors are written slightly to the side, but the line hits the ornamentation. The 7th eye belongs to the word day. If we count the number of Yor words on the original, there are 25 occurrences of this word. We can simulate this situation in the Mahler version by checking alignments that exist on a surface of 25 letters. The letter K fills this criteria as there are 25 Ks. Again, we find a lot of alignments between 3 letters, a few between 4, and none of 5 and above using a 1 mm wide line. So is the alignment of 5 and more positions on the original the product of coincidence, or are the design behind the positioning? Intuitions say it is probable we have design if we can find many letters in alignment. I felt almost convinced after this Mahler experiment, which allowed me to move further, but this question bothered me. Was there not any way I could find out beyond reasonable doubt that this structure was the product of design, or not? Then I noticed something interesting. I discovered another strange correlation. I saw a line moving exactly 90 degrees to the first line I discovered, piercing 5 eyes where 4 was pierced through the center and the 5th in the ornamentation but very close to the center. And then it hit the R in Mr. Francis Bacon, top title sentence. This line goes through 3 Yor words and 2 eyes in other words. In the anagram subtraction of the title sentence and the Kempton message, I crossed letters, and the R is the 5th letter in this sentence. In the Kempton message, the 6th symbol is the arrow, the I. But we have a crossed F in the Kempton symbols, and also an additional dot after master in the manuscript title, which could be seen as a character. During the Renaissance, the shortening MR stood for master, not Mr. Thus we could interpret the position of this I line as intended to pierce the sentence in the same place or near where the I, the arrow symbol, exists in the equivalent position of the Kempton symbols. If this is an intended feature, then the arrow, which seems to point in the same direction as the line, down and left, could be a hint. The instruction could be, start by following alignments of the letter I down and left from the direction of this position in the manuscript title sentence. Or, the correlation is created by coincidence, of course. While looking closely at the geometry, I also found that there were 2, 3, 4, 5 triangles present on the sheet, among I alignments of 5 or more characters. The second line giving the larger triangle I didn't notice until a year ago, so I need to temporarily leave the chronological explanation. 3, 4, 5 triangles had a special significance to Renaissance esoteric movements, which I will show soon. The 2, 3, 4, 5 triangles on the sheet share the same 90-degree crossing. The number of eyes used to create the lines for this structure are 23, and the total amount of eyes on the sheet are 58. Thus 40% of the eyes on the sheet create this triangle structure. As some of the eyes forming these triangles have the center section slightly to the side of the line, but ornamentation on the line, one could argue that the angles are creatively constructed by the decoder, me. But for each line there are several eyes pierced directly through the center of the letter, and these eyes are spread out far from each other on the line. The purple circles you see here are the eyes pierced in the center. It is easy to see that it is not possible to change the direction of the alignments without losing some eyes. Another thing I noticed was that the smaller 3, 4, 5 triangle could be mirrored along the shorter side, where the 37 angled tip ended up exactly on the ornamented eye on the backside of the sheet. Also, the text I self in pre seemed to follow the imaginary line drawn to mirror the triangle. The larger triangle, if mirrored, did not seem to end up anywhere special. Was this an intended feature, did the positioning of the eye on a mirrored version of the smaller triangle point out the significance of this smaller 3-4-5 triangle? Or was it the whole structure with the 3-3-4-5 triangles that was of interest? The 47th proposition of Euclid, or the Pythagorean theorem, have been a central symbol to the Freemasons for as long as speculative Freemasonry have existed. In this section from Peter Amundsen's book The Organist, which I read in early 2012 a bit further down the chain of code, we see a distinct pattern spelling apud, which means published by, the rosy cross, or at least cross can be understood to be intentionally created by using a 3-4-5 triangle. The structure was found by Amundsen in the first folio. This puts the significance of this triangle to as early as 1623, when the first folio was published.
Much later, in 1717, the first Grand Lodge of speculative Freemasons was formed in London, and in 1723 James Anderson published the Constitutions of the Freemasons. This book has a clear symbol in the center of its front page, picturing the Pythagorean theorem.
Back in 2011, I did not have the statistical tools to understand if alignments of 4 or more characters were to be expected to be the product of coincidence. The info I will now give is later work on this matter, so the story is not 100% chronological here either. The next section is the result of research I did lately. In 1983, there was a PhD thesis published, The Alignment and Clustering of Quasars, by Glyn George. Professor in mathematics Thomas Persson at the University of Lund have helped me to use this PhD paper and other works on point alignment to analyze historic cryptography. The formula you see here calculates an estimate of the expected number of alignments between a certain amount of dots or characters minimum, randomly distributed within a fixed area, and with a certain width of the path, the line. If one scatters dots randomly within an area, one will get alignments of dots created by the force of coincidence. If one repeats this experiment with the same area size and the same amount of dots an infinite number of times, letting chance position the dots each time, then the average number of alignments between a certain amount of dots or more will get closer and closer to the mathematically defined expected value the more tests we do. This expected value is calculated by the formula seen here. There have been computer tests done that confirms this formula even if it is an estimate. These tests have been done both with randomly placed dots on a surface and with non-random features such as pizza restaurant on maps. When analyzing thousands of randomly placed scenarios and hundreds of cities with pizza restaurants marked out, they found that the formula is applicable in both cases. As positions of pizza restaurants is not truly randomly created, we can assume the formula gives a good estimate on characters in text also, as these are not truly randomly positioned either. If we compare an actual case, like the positions of the eyes on the Northumberland cover sheet, with the expected value in our calculations and find that the difference is large, then we can suspect intended positioning of the eyes. But we can of course not prove intended positioning. We are dealing with statistics, therefore we must be careful so we don't take an actual case as intended solely based on favorable statistics. But let's investigate. The estimate formula is very sensitive to the width of the alignment, the W in the formula. Dots are defined as in alignment when the central position of each dot is within the borders of the line. We shall see later that just a few parts of a millimeter's difference in this value W will make a huge difference in the expected number of alignments. So let's investigate. After I got the formula from Mr. Persson, I began by investigating the first YOR alignment I discovered. I thought it would be interesting to see what width of a line is needed in order for 5 eyes in the word YOR out of 25 total to end up in alignment by the force of coincidence. In other words, how wide must a line be to expect one alignment of 5 or more eyes in the word YOR on the investigated sheet? The line goes through 6 eyes in the word your, but one of the yours are slightly off and the line pairs the ornamentation of that eye. So I excluded this your for this investigation. The other eyes are positioned in a very tight alignment. If we exchange the eyes to dots, where each dot take up the exact same space as the central area of the eye, we could in theory draw a very thin line and the central parts of these dots will be inside the line area. But we are not 100% sure about the original distance between the front and back sheet. But the center of the backside eye is nevertheless close to the line even if we experiment with this distance. If John Davis of Hereford used this sheet to write scribble, with no intention of hiding a cryptogram, he would have scribbled the 25 yours within an area 329 times 249 millimeters, more or less on random, as many of these words doesn't seem to be part of any sentences. Thus a random scenario is usable in this case. So let's check the mathematical graph of this formula for the case described above. This 3D graph shows the result. The Z-axis shows how many dots we have total on the surface. The Y-axis shows how many expected alignments we have, and the X-axis shows the width of the alignment path. To be able to expect even one alignment of 5 dots, we will need a path 7.6 millimeters in width. This is almost 1 centimeter. If we draw a line that is 1 millimeter thick, which would represent a line drawn with a normal pen, then the expected number of alignments would be 0.0022. So let's see how this result shows up on the Northumberland manuscript cover sheet. The red line you see here is 7.6 millimeters thick, and the green line in the center of it is 1 millimeter thick. 1 millimeter is enough to position the center part of each eye within the borders of the line. But statistically, we will need the red line in order to expect one alignment of these 5 dots. This sets things in perspective. I could of course not prove this alignment structure was the product of design, but I now understood that the chance for it being just that was significant. I then checked the rest of the eyes in the 25-word yours on the sheet, and found 3 more lines piercing 4 yours each. These lines were also very tight in the alignment of the center position of each eye, so I used the formula. I checked how wide the line must be in order to expect 4 alignments of 4 dots or more each. To expect 4 alignments of 4 dots or more each, we would need 5 mm wide lines. This is just slightly thinner than the 7.6 mm line from our last experiment, and the precision of the existing alignments exceeds 5 mm by far. We can easily fit the center of each eye in a 1 mm wide line. The expected value for 1 mm would be 0.15. As you can see, we have very sharp alignments on all 4 lines. The eyes are pierced in the center except for 2 of the eyes where they are pierced just slightly to one side but still hitting the eye. I have marked these eyes with purple rings. The alignments are much more precise than 5 mm. But what about the letter I by itself, inside any word? This was the method we used to form the 2, 3, 4, 5 triangles. It would be interesting to see what width we need to form the alignments between this letter. I have taken into account ornamentation of letters to see if the width we need include these characters in the center part. We have 58 eyes on the cover sheet, many lines between 4 eyes, 6 between 5, 2 between 6, and 2 between 7. As we have more dots on the surface in this experiment, 58 instead of 25, expected alignments are more common, but we still need quite thick lines to expect alignments. If we check the 6 eyes in a line graph, we see that in order to get the 4 alignments we have on the surface between 6 or more eyes, 2 between 6 and 2 between 7, we will need a 5 mm thick line. Let's see if we can incorporate all eyes, including those pierced in the ornamentation, with less than a 5 mm line on the cover sheet. If we project the 5 mm line on all 4, 6 and 7 alignment structures, we see that in 3 places marked with blue boxes, the center sections of the eyes are close to the edge of the 5 mm line, but the ornamentation is on the line. This could indicate that we must use this 5 mm line to get 4 alignments, as to be expected from coincidence. Thus this case is not as clear-cut as the case with the word your. So what knowledge can we gain from this? As we are dealing with statistics, we are not dealing with true or false, but we can say that in our statistical investigation of the word your structure, we find that the actual case is significantly different from the expected value. The structure could of course still be a product of coincidence, but we understand that the chance for this is significantly lower than we understood before the investigation. Thus the chance for deliberate positioning of these words your is high. In our investigation of individual eyes, we found that most eyes in the alignments are positioned in tight alignment, but there are a few that are positioned slightly off. Thus we cannot attack this structure as in the same clear-cut case as the your case. An important thing to remember is that if a structure seems to follow along coincidental patterns, this does not mean that it is not a product of design. It only means that statistics is not applicable as a tool in that individual case to get an understanding of deliberate design or not. But what about the 2, 3, 4, 5 triangles? Are there not any way to get an understanding of coincidence regarding these structures? It is interesting that the small triangles, the one on the front and the mirrored one created by me, both hit an eye exactly on their 37-degree angle. The mirrored triangle is not a structure, as the upper line is drawn with no foundation in eye letters, but the existence of these 2 corner eyes are striking. I checked O first and found 118 O's on the cover sheet. This is a lot of O's. I concluded that the statistical formula was not useful as a tool in this case. I found many alignments here in the diagonal direction, even between many O's with a thin line, so I could not get an evaluation from the formula that was useful. But in the second lecture I will return and analyze the O in more depth. I then shifted focus to the W's. There were only 18 W's on the sheet, and I found 6 of them in alignment in one place vertically and one alignment of 4 W's. I also found one alignment of 3 W's, but those stand too high a chance to be created by coincidence, even here. But the 6th alignment was somewhat interesting. According to the formula, I would expect a width of over 10 mm in order to get 6 dots out of 18 total in alignment, in this type of scenario. But 4 of the W's were in a repetition of a similar kind of sentence, seen here in the blue box. Thus this alignment of the 4 W's could be intentionally created without thinking of creating a cryptogram, but just listing titles. I found no other use for alignments of the letter W. During the beginning of the 17th century, there was 3 interesting paintings produced by professional painters in Italy. They had several things in common, with the most striking being the sentence in Latin written on a tomb in all 3 paintings, et in Arcadia ego, which means roughly in Arcadia I. In Renaissance literature, Arcadia was a very prominent theme used by many writers and painters. The concept came from Greek classic literature and was defined as an idyllic landscape where people lived in peace and harmony, a kind of utopia. In the first painting, painted by the Italian artist Guercino in 1618 to 1622, 2 shepherds, being mirrored versions of each other position-wise, look at a skull on a tomb. The skull has a bee on the forehead and a mouse is also watching it. On the tomb is the motto Et in Arcadia ego written. The bee as a symbol can be connected to the Rosicrucian movement. In many paintings by Guercino, Masonic symbolism can be identified, even though the first Grand Lodge was not yet established by the time they were painted. Nearly a decade later, in 1627, a French master painter, Nicolas Poussin, who was active in Italy for most of his career, painted another version. This time we have 4 shepherds watching a tomb under a tree. The motto is once again written on the tomb. The last painting was created by Nicolas Poussin in 1637 to 1638. This painting is of very good quality and depicts a tomb, the 4 shepherds, and a shepherd pointing towards the motto on the tomb. Then strangely, 100 years later in the mid-18th century, the late painting by Poussin appears mirrored as a sculpture in the garden of the Shawkesbury Hall Mansion in Great Haywood, Staffordshire, England. The sculpture was commissioned by the Anson family who lived in the mansion at the time, and was planned and designed by an astronomer and mathematician who also worked as a garden designer. The sculpture itself was created by famous Flemish sculptor Peter Scheemakers. Interestingly, this sculpture in the garden of the Shawkesbury Hall also has a very famous series of characters written beneath it. It is the Shawkesbury inscription. This cipher, which many believe it is, has never been satisfactorily deciphered. There are many claims, but none that is commonly accepted to be correct. The sculptor Peter Scheemakers was active in London and also created another famous statue for the Poets' Corner, a memorial to William Shakespeare. The sculpture in the Shawkesbury Hall garden was created sometimes between 1748 and 1763.
The reason I caught interest in this painting was 2. Firstly, there had been rumors for a long time that this painting contained hidden geometry. Rumors in this field of research is not strong reasons to investigate, but nevertheless it caught my attention. I also saw an interesting alignment experiment between eyes in Peter Amundsen's book The Organist. Also, the painting has a very interesting story. In brief,
Nicolas Fouquet was superintendent of finance to the French king. In 1656, Nicolas Fouquet, for some unknown reason, sent his brother Louis Fouquet, a priest, to Rome. The family Fouquet acted as patrons for painter Nicolas Poussin, living in Rome, and Nicolas and the Fouquets were well acquainted. It was on this occasion that Louis Fouquet wrote the following letter. He, which means Nicolas Poussin, and I discussed certain things which I shall with ease be able to explain to you in detail. Things which will give you, through Monsieur Poussin, advantages which even kings would have great pains to draw from him, and which, according to him, it is possible that nobody else will ever discover in the centuries to come. And what is more, there are things so difficult to discover that nothing now on this earth can prove of better fortune nor be their equal. Why though not kings, which is referred to in this letter, managed to draw the secret from him, the French king certainly knew something was up, and that it had something to do with Nicolas Poussin. In 1661, he had Nicolas Fouquet arrested on murky charges. He seized all of Fouquet's property and insisted on personally and privately going through Fouquet's paper and documents himself. Coincidentally, in 1665, the same year in which Nicolas Fouquet was imprisoned, Nicolas Poussin died. For the next 20 years, King Louis jockeyed for possession of what he regarded as Poussin's most important work, The Shepherds of Arcadia. When he finally got hold of it, he did not put it on public display, but hid it away in his private quarters and let no one view it without his express permission. This story was fascinating for me. Another fascinating thing was that somehow this painting had been wrapped up in the myth regarding the fake historic mystery about René de Château. The priest Saunière in this mystery, who got very rich from seemingly no reason, was said to have been visited the Louvre in the 19th century to buy a print of the painting. He then used the painting to solve a map to get to a treasure located in the south of France. It is now known that the mystery surrounding this myth was partly created by 3 scammers from Paris who planted fake documents in the Bibliothèque Nationale. Also, the Louvre keeps very detailed records of all transactions and did this in the 19th century also. Saunière, the priest who was said to have bought the painting, never did, at least not under his own name. The Louvre in Paris told me that this facsimile was true to the original size in relation horizontal and vertical. I immediately noticed that one of the shepherds pointed to the R in Arcadia. Directly after the R is C. Could this be RC, the Rosicrucians that was hinted? Vague but possible. But if R is pointed at as a hint for us to remove it, we get et in Arcadia ego, which would mean in Arcadia I or in Arcadie I. Arcadie was the name given to Nova Scotia in 1604 by the French settlers, and the name was used for many years after that. Could this be an instruction? Also, why is the shepherd pointing at a crack in the tomb? His fingertip is placed directly on this crack, and the crack seems to be straight and extended, looking like a line. X-ray photos of paintings reveal layers of paint underneath the surface. It is thus possible to see if the painter has painted over some older work. In an X-ray of Poussin's painting, experts have noticed that the staffs are painted before objects in the foreground. In this image, the tomb has been painted over the staff, which means the staff was created on the canvas before the tomb. This is not how master painters from the time painted. They followed strict rules, painting backgrounds first and then foreground objects. Are the staffs painted first because they form part of a geometric cryptogram? If so, then it could explain why a shepherd is pointing at a straight crack in the tomb. Maybe we should look for not so obvious lines in the image. Let's follow the instructions. If we have A. The staffs were painted before the tomb, which makes it probable the staffs are to be used with the cryptogram, and B. The bending shepherd points to a line, so let's check all straight lines we have in the image in the same width as the line the shepherd is pointing to. We find that the staffs are hidden behind objects in many places, but they follow straight lines. Also, the leftmost shepherd is actually looking with his eyes in alignment with the two lines on his staff. This is interesting. I then noticed that if I placed the line between the eyes of the rightmost shepherds, I got an exact 37-degree angle to one of the staff line's lower section, and then a 90-degree angle directly on the line looked at by the leftmost shepherd. Also, the straight crack in the tomb which the bending shepherd is pointing at hits the first line I drew at a 53-degree angle. This means we have another 3-4-5 triangle inside the first. When I compared with the two 3-4-5 triangles I extracted from the Northumberland manuscript cover sheet, I got an exact match. All internal size relations are the exact same. I have a perfect match of geometric form between two completely separate works from the Renaissance, a document and a painting created hundreds of miles and 20 years apart. But does this mean I now have confirmed the extraction from Northumberland manuscript, and from this painting as correct and intended by a codemaker? Let's take a step back. Wouldn't it be possible for me to just draw the form I got from the manuscript on top of the painting? Let's criticize. If I wanted to create 3-4-5 triangles, could I not just have drawn a line in 53-degree angle to line A to get the line B? Yes, of course, but how large would the chance be for coincidence to place the three eyes of the rightmost shepherds in alignment with this 53-degree angled line B? And also, if I try turning the line B 90 degrees at different places along the stretch of the line, coincidence just happened to make us hit the lower edge of line D exactly when we turn 90 degrees at the edge of the staff line the first shepherd looks at. And did coincidence also create the fact that the angle between the lines C and D are 53 degrees, or between D and B 37 degrees? It is easy to see that this pattern, if created by coincidence, is extremely unlikely to happen. Of course I have drawn this pattern myself, it is not present on the painting, but for this to be without thought by Poussin when he painted is not believable. So, these geometric forms are identical, exactly identical, and the chance for them each as separate to be created by the force of coincidence or in the mind of a decoder only is low. Thus, they confirm each other as intended cryptogram solutions.